continue on the notion of the double self, and I'll be using William Wycherley's The Country Wife and Ben Jonson's Volpone. What I mean when I say the double self is the idea that a character may present multiple identities depending upon the group they're with. For instance, they may present one identity to one social class, such as the upper classes, and then a completely separate and completely opposite identity to the lower classes, for instance. An example would be Volpone in Volpone, who to society presents the image of being a sickly man who's easily taken advantage of. However, in the company of Mosca, away from society's eyes, the opposite proves to be the case, and he presents his true identity as the trickster. The double self may also take a second appearance as that of the public self and the private self, an example being that of Viola from Twelfth Night, who, when in the presence of the other characters on stage, appears as the man Cesario. However, away from their eyes, she reverts back to her female identity. However, this is done primarily through her speech, as it isn't until the end of the play where she reverts back to her female dress. It can also be linked with the idea of disguise and deception within early modern theatre. And like both of these, it's a common feature within early modern and restoration theatre. However, unlike other such common theatrical features, such as cross-dressing, which can be seen as a predominantly female activity, it appears to have very little in the way of gender bias, as both male and female characters can be seen to create multiple identities. However, it must be admitted that, as can be seen in the case of Viola and Mrs. Pinchwife in The Country Wife, that both do in fact resort to cross-dressing in order to portray their second identity. The Country Wife is an excellent example of how the double self can be used within theatre, as many of the characters use the double self in order to create a second identity. For instance, we have Horner, we have Mrs. Pinchwife, and also Harcourt. However, in this presentation I'll be focusing upon Horner and Mrs. Pinchwife. The most prominent example of the double self within The Country Wife is Horner's presentation of himself as a eunuch, and this arguably provides the whole basis for the events of the play. To society, to the Pinchwives and to Jasper and so forth, he presents this identity that he's created for himself as the eunuch. However, in the presence of Harcourt and Quack, he reverts back to his roguish behaviour. However, then we also have Mrs. Pinchwife, who, unlike Horner, has her second identity imposed upon her by her husband's insecurities. Through his paranoia, he makes that when out in town she'll be seen and is pursued by gallants such as Horner. He dresses her as a man. And thus, by dressing her as a man, her second identity is then created for her. Through this such scenario, Wycherley is commenting upon and essentially mocking those in London society who may take those people, who take people at face value, and kind of mocking them and potentially warning them against doing so. And as we can see from events such as we've been seeing in the coney catching pamphlets, many criminals at the time were devising ways of conning people which essentially made them form a second self, which would be an example of the public self and the private self. Considering Pinchwife's paranoia, his allowing Mrs. Pinchwife to go out in disguise suggests that he believes her to be well enough disguised in order to trick and fool Horner. However, in believing this, it shows himself to be one of those individuals who is unable to see beyond a false identity to the true identity below, and thus proves himself to be one of the people that Wycherley is mocking. Now, if we step away from the direct events of the play for a moment and instead look at the double self from the perspective of the audience, for the audience, the double self takes on something of a meta-theatrical element, as they themselves are invited to form two identities. This is done frequently through the use of asides, which are frequently used throughout The Country Wife. Through these asides, the audience is invited to go from their identity as the audience, and thus the viewer, to a second identity as the participant in the events on the play, as they're invited to join this one-sided discourse with those on stage. Having said that, the actors as well also form the double self, as they have one identity as the actor and the second identity as the character. But however, there are times when this actor and character identities do coexist. And this is seen, first of all, in the prologue to The Country Wife, where Mr. Hart, who is said to have played Horner originally, comes on stage and addresses the audience in delivering the prologue. We can assume that this was presented as himself, as he states, but we the actors humbly will submit, stating that it's the actors thus suggests that it is himself rather than his character who is speaking. A similar example can also be seen in the epilogue to Volpone, for which I have a clip, and we'll show you now.
The seasoning of a play is the applause. Now, though the fox be punished by the laws, he yet doth hope there is no suffering due for any fact that hath been done against you. If there be, censure him here he doubtful stands. If not, fare jovially and clap your hands.
Here I just have a visual example from the text of the speech we've just seen. And as we can see, it's a scripted piece, and that Jonson has put as being addressed by Volpone. Now obviously Volpone is the character, but similarly the plea for applause is very much the plea of an actor rather than of the character. And thus the two can seem to coexist, which is also seen in the bows that we saw at the end of the clip, as the actors are dressed as the character and thus have the physical appearance of their characters. However, the bow is the action of the actor, and thus again the two can be seen to coexist. Wycherley's noted to have been highly influenced by Jonson, and he even references Jonson's play The Alchemist in his prologue to The Country Wife. And it's been noted that Wycherley was especially indebted to Volpone for plot devices and verbal echoes. And indeed, that between the two plays there are a striking number of similarities that would suggest that The Country Wife is potentially a double and second self of Volpone, with this time the addition of certain restoration ideas such as libertinism. When reading Volpone, the reader is instantly presented with the notion that this is a play of where people may not be as they appear. This is done through the fact that the play has two titles, which is something you can see from the title page down at the bottom. It has the name Volpone and also The Fox, which is the English translation. So aside from instantly setting up two names, it also sets up two locations, that of Italy and that of England. Now, particularly with restrictions that were placed on playwrights at the time, where certain events, if set within England, would have caused problems and possible arrest for the playwrights, locations were often moved further afield. Thus, the play is somewhat given an Italian identity, and where the play is set in Italy, but also the hidden English identity of the play that's representing English events. This theme of kind of the double is also carried on throughout other names of other characters in the play. For instance, we have Mosca, which translates as meaning a sort of fly, and also Corvino, which is Italian for a small crow. In addition, we also have Androgino, who, according to John Florio, translates as he that is both male and female. Now, this is a question of the most literal sense of the double self, as well as having the name with two meanings. It also appears as he that is literally male and female, and thus is in possession of both male and female identities. And as I've said, there are many similarities between the two plays, including identity and also the treatment of women. And whilst not necessarily a rebirth, The Country Wife may be considered a retelling of the story of Volpone, but presented to different audiences, and thus assuming the two separate identities depending on the audience that's viewing it. So Volpone for the early modern audience, whilst The Country Wife for Restoration. However, Volpone isn't the original text that we may presume, as in Volpone, Jonson borrows creatively from more than 30 classical texts in 10% of his play's total lines, which in turn suggests that Volpone is a second identity of much older and classical tales. So throughout the course, and with the addition of The Country Wife, we can see the multiple identities of what is essentially a root story. In The Country Wife, we see that there's a full range of foolish characters, such as Sparkish, Pinchwife, and Sir Jasper. Now, what makes these characters questionably so foolish is their inability to see beyond what they see at face value. In particular, Horner. And this is added to by the fact that the women in the play instantly see through Horner's disguise as a eunuch in his second identity. In addition, we also have that Horner sees through Mrs. Pinchwife's disguise straight away. There is essentially no disguise as he sees her. And thus, we can see that and as we can see again, Wycherley mocking those who are unable to see, and that essentially it's the foolish characters in the play who are unable to see beyond the identity that people first present. This is particularly poignant given the time where the constant to and froing between Protestant and Catholic monarchs meant that as the religion in the country shifted, many people may have had to hide their true religion in order to escape persecution, and may have had to present what's not necessarily a different religion, very much reduce how they are and create something of a second identity. It might also be taken that the double self creates something of the Gothic, even in the comedies of the time, as particularly in the case of the male characters who create double selves. As we see, particularly with Horner, he changes his appearance in no way. It's only a second identity created through word of mouth. Thus, the element of the Gothic is created as it invokes the notion of the enemy who is present, but who looks no different and is invisible to those around them. The conclusions that I've come to whilst investigating the double self is, whilst initially I believed it to be a notion that was somewhat devoid of gender bias, I've changed my opinion, as whilst women and men do both use the double self, men can be seen to have far more freedom with the creation of their second identity. As we see with Horner, it's his decision, no one's making him do it, and it's all under his own control. However, with Mrs. Pinchwife, her second identity is imposed upon her by her husband, and in the instance of the country wife, we can see that she's forced to wear male attire, and thus is an outward symbol of her subservience to male rule, as she has been forced to give up her femininity and give in to masculinity. In addition, when men in theatre create their double self, it is often for the purpose of regaining or indeed gaining power and status, or in the case of tragedies, avenging a wrong against them. However, women, in their creation of the double self, tend to kind of be more in pursuit of men, as is particularly the case in Twelfth Night, and is somewhat the case in The Country Wife. And thus, their integrity is somewhat reduced compared to their male counterparts. Another conclusion that I've come to is that the double self may leave the audience feeling somewhat confused, as many identities are being thrown around, both the identities of the actors and the characters, and then with the characters, the multiple identities that they themselves are balancing. This frequent to and fro between many identities may leave an audience in confusion, thus mimicking the confusion and kind of discomfort felt by Pinchwife in particular, who was never able to truly discern what Horner's necessary true intentions are. It was a slight element of confusion. On the synopsis of The Country Wife, it's commented that modern critics have much debated its central themes and question marks still remain on whether Horner is hero or villain. And I would debate that with Wycherley's use of the double self, it isn't a case of whether Horner is hero or villain, but that he can be a case of the hero and the villain.
Okay, are we got comments and questions? Anyone on the floor have a question for Laura?
So are you saying that the double self is a way of giving greater depth to the characters in the play? Do you think it's also like the playwright's attempts to break just the stereotypes by portraying a bit more than just the surface of each character?
I think it is, yeah, because whilst, particularly in Country Wife, it's tackled as a way of forming humour within the play, I think it's a way of showing what may necessarily be underneath the surface in the character, but brought forth in a way that isn't necessarily believable, but that may present a lower, much more in-depth view of the character.
I was intrigued by your brief reference to Wycherley's kind of relationship with Johnson, kind of in terms of the dramatic father, if you like. You may expand on that a bit more about how you think Johnson's plays affected Wycherley's.
It's, as I commented, there are a great deal of similarities that could only have come about if he was a massive fan. Because there's the issues of women, identity, and also kind of double meanings, as in many of the characters in Witches plays as well, their names also mimic, although in English, unlike in Volpone, their names mimic their personality. So I think there's a great deal of similarity between the two, which suggests that it was a very close and very, what's the word, very kind of, he really admired him, and was someone that he very much aspired to be, which I think potentially was because Wycherley, it's described as one of his most daringly written plays, and Johnson, we know as well, was imprisoned for being somewhat daring.